think I would describe it as I started, I thought I had the bull by the horns. Within the first half year, I was a deer in the headlights. To gain the real inside information of what that association takes on a yearly basis for producers, for private property rights, is amazing. And so when Kevin asked me about it, I had not done the due diligence to really deep dive into the history of the Colorado Cattlemen's Association. And thank you, Kevin, because that was a fascinating journey back 156 years for me. And already Joy has said she wants to read the book next. Brady wants to read the book next. That book that a lot of this information comes out of is called Century in the Saddle, the history of the Colorado Cattlemen's Association. First 100 years. We have 56 years since, and we've done a lot of things in the interim, and we'll go over some of that as well. So as I said, this is the nation's oldest and longest lasting livestock association in the nation. And bear with me as I read some of this because it's easier to go ahead and read it to get it right, and then the rest of it we can just share with each other. So at the time of this writing, it was 150 years. It's 156 years now. And we go back, and our country was just coming out of the Civil War, and it ended in 2.5 years. Colorado at that time was yet a decade away from becoming a state. Mining had been the big boom that brought a lot of people into the Denver area and the Front Range and the Intermountain area, but the plains largely were intact as native open area. They had not seen a whole lot of involvement with cattle. Charles Goodnight and others were going through the eastern part of the state, but they were mostly trailing cattle into the northern states. But at the same time, as Denver was growing, people were moving in, and the mining industry was growing, it also brought a lot of the less desirable individuals into this part of the world, where law existed right within Denver and some of those cities. Outside of that, a short distance, there was no law. And so farmers that were on the river valleys, Arkansas, Platte, Mountain, and others, they were being degraded by crooks and thieves. And the modest beef cattle industry was just taking hold. But what they found was the plains of eastern Colorado, contrary to their eastern pastures that have 40 inches of rainfall, during the winter we can graze cattle without having to bale feed and provide supplement. And we're talking a different critter and a different goal set at the time. They could turn crossbred cattle of Hereford, Devon, and others on longhorns out, let them run in the winter, bring them back in, take them to market, and that's what we harvested. It would have been what we would call select beef today. But to them, they survived on their own out on the plains without needing supplement. But because of that, they were easy pickings. And let's imagine what they were running on. They had headquarters on waterways, the Arkansas, the Platte, the Bijou, and others. And then they free-ranged as far as those cattle wanted to go. They'd go clear to Kansas from the Arkansas, they'd go clear south through Mexico. And so you had big issues with your cattle getting a long ways away from you, unlike what we do today, where we can keep a pretty good eye on our cattle. They couldn't. And so the beginnings of this association was to address the concerns of the livestock producers who were being predated on by crooks and thieves on their cattle. So in November of 1867, the Rocky Mountain News printed the following message: "Notice to stockmen. A meeting of all persons interested in stock raising and stock traders will be held in the city of Denver on Saturday, November 4, at the Planter House at 2 o'clock afternoon for purposes of electing an organization to secure the passage of laws at the next legislature for protection." It was signed by Thomas B. Farmer, Captain A.G. Reed, McLaughlin Wilson, and 20 others. That November 24 initial stock meeting was held to appoint the association. That was the first formal meeting of the Colorado Stock Growers Association. The meeting was held at the Planter House, a 2-story hotel and a stagecoach stop in downtown Denver at 16th and Blake Street. And it's pretty cool, it's at 16th and Blake Street now. It's the 16th Street Mall and just a stone's throw away from the downtown convention center and where our beloved Rockies play baseball. And the rest is history, they say, but this association was going to be challenged to even live past its initial concept. What the committee did, and this is an example, and it's hard to read, but those are the actual writings of the formation of the Colorado Stockbrokers Association in '67. They enlisted the services of a young 27-year-old detective out of Denver named David J. Cook. And while he was known to be very diligent, professional, and would not turn loose of anything till he got an answer, this was his first private job, and he really wanted to make this right. So he went out, and in the period that he was out investigating where the losses were occurring, he interviewed producers, he interviewed their inventory, and he kept religious notes of what he was doing. And when he finished the investigation and made out his report, he actually probably knew more about the Plains cattle industry than the producers did. They all knew their general area, but he knew from New Mexico to Nebraska and from Kansas to the Front Range. So he concluded his investigation and he brought it back to the board to present to them. And it wasn't quite what the board expected. I really feel like the leadership of the association thought that just the presence of a detective would be the deterrent they were looking for. So as he opened up and he started reading where the cattle went, where the numbers went, and the cost of the numbers, the guilty parties included all three officers of the association: President Captain Reed, Vice President Andrew Swain, and Secretary Alexander Davidson. And of course the meeting went chaotic, and they ran out the doors. You can imagine what happened when they caught them in the dirt streets. But to this day, the first president, Captain A.G. Reed, in the board offices of Colorado Cattlemen's Association, is the only president that's not featured on our wall. So our reputation as the stockbrokers took a big hit in the very beginning. That we formed this association and it looked like we were going to try to just hide the rustling. But we prevailed, and we've done that many, many times in the face of controversy. And so the next president that was appointed to succeed was President A.J. Williams. And he was also in the process of forming an exchange bank. And Cook was not forgotten, and for the next 30 years, he worked with the association, combating theft losses for the association. So we were not the only association that was formed at that time. And here in Southeast Colorado, we have an organization that's almost as old as the Colorado Cattlemen's Association. And it was formed in 1870 on the specific problem of cattle theft here in Southeast Colorado. And so I'll read a little history. The first meeting of cattlemen for the purpose of forming an association to protect the interests of the cattle business was held in Old Los Animas in March of 1870. Not much was done at this first initial meeting, but they elected officers. Then in April of 1871, the cattlemen of Baca County met again in Los Animas. They had a preamble for their constitution and bylaws were submitted and adopted. Again, it seemed it was much too soon for this type of association, and it was allowed to expire for lack of interest. But in February of 1874, with the ever-increasing debt and the increasing financial losses due to cattle theft, some of the largest ones recommended a vigilante committee. And because, like I said, you do not have law down here, maybe a few of the larger towns had a sheriff, but that sheriff worked the town. He wasn't employed by the cattlemen to go out on the range. And in fact, what did not exist was laws against cattle theft. It was well recognized in history that a horse thief was hung immediately. But cattle theft, you just tried to get your cattle back and they went on doing what they were doing. There was no law that really said it was illegal to steal cattle. So they met in Pryor T. store in West Los Animas. There were cattle raisers from New Mexico, the Dry Cimarron, Los Animas County, and Kansas. There was a great deal of discussion about that vigilante system, and they went 5 nights holding meetings, fighting over how they were going to do this. And it finally prevailed that they would try to deal with it first in a legal manner. and that became the Baca County Stock Growers Association. In 1902, the Baca County Stock Growers Association changed their name to Bent Prowers Cattle and Horse Growers, and though it only names 2 counties, they serve Bent, Prowers, Baca, Otero, and Kiowa counties even to today. It is the oldest and largest affiliate of the Colorado Cattlemen's Association, and we're proud to be leaders. They're proud to be leaders. They've often sent folks up to the board and have several presidents within their association, and they continue to lead for the folks down here in southeast Colorado. Their first president was Stephen Jones. Their vice president at the time, and then successive president was John Prowers. And this is an example of how the cowboys took care of those cattle. The Colorado Stock Growers Association put together a unique idea in this process of free-range cattle on the eastern plains, and that was to develop counties. And then from the members of the cattle associations, they selected commissioners for those counties, and those commissioners had several jobs to decide the debate between brands on cattle and also the process of rustling. This was another key element, that why the operations were centered on water sources. If you filed on the water, you claimed all the acres, hundreds of thousands of acres that didn't have water on it. And in some of them, and the Bijou, and now Kiowa County, they filed on 650,000 acres and fenced it. And so we're talking big operations, and the state had 3 unofficial counties, northern, central, and southeast, bounded by geographic factors is how they kind of ruled that. But it was a method to finally get some control of how you did roundups, where you did roundups, and who was responsible to be where and when. So during the early years, there was quite a bit with Indians. Most of the cattle growers knew that if you kind of got along, and that's a Charles Goodnight philosophy, in order to get his cattle through eastern Colorado, he was willing to figure, I'm going to have to drop a few beeves here, a few beeves there, and that'll get me by. But still, there was incidences where that wasn't good enough. There was direct death, there was stampeding, it was just malicious type things. But we weren't innocent in the whole process. We committed some atrocious actions also that did not better the situation between the settlers and the Native Americans. But in our area, John Powers wed Amachi Ochini, the daughter of an Arapaho chief. And the tribes that were involved in the eastern Colorado were the Cheyenne, Ute, Arapaho, and Sioux. And even in my area, Grandmother told the stories that the Cordovas that settled right above the confluence of the Chippewa and the Purgatory, that was the same thing that the Cordovas had to deal with. When the tribes would come by, they were often starving in winter, and they needed beef. And when they could, they would share our beef, but there were times that they couldn't share our beef, and taking no for an answer wasn't often accepted. You had trouble because of it. But through the years, we managed to figure that out, and even in western Colorado with the Utes, and passed through that era without the whole lot of loss of life that it could have been. So a lot of the newspapers back east were fascinated with the burgeoning beef industry, and Colorado Cattlemen worked with them and told the stories, but what happened was a huge influx of people that were under the impression, like so many of those Western stories they were iconic, they were ideologically formative, they were supposed to make you feel great. And they said, man, if a guy can ride out there on a horse and bankroll a handful of cattle, and in 10 to 15 years, like these originals, they're running on 100,000 acres, that's easy money. Well, it brought an influx into our region, and it brought more cattle, it brought more ranchers, and again, it was a process of the association trying to figure out how to organize this, dealing with legislature, dealing with laws, and trying to affect laws. And in order to do that, they established their own brand record, that every every individual that owned cattle reported to the Colorado Livestock Growers Association and registered their brands so that it was known. That helped those commissioners know who's in their area. If cattle had strayed because of blizzards in the north and we found them on the Arkansas, we had a pretty good idea that they had a long walk to go back, but they needed to get on the rail at Denver, one or the other. So they put together the organization of the brands and the roundups, and it would have, down here in the southeast part, it would have 20 to 40 cowboys, 10 to 15 wagons, each wagon representing the home ranch, and then a remuda of 100 horses, with the youngest cowboys being in charge of controlling where the horses were. And they did it 2 times a year. Their first roundup was in the spring, and they branded this year's calves, and then they drove last year's calf crop to the railheads and loaded them and shipped them to the markets. Then again in the fall, they came back again and sorted off. And so twice a year they were out there doing it, which is about a full-time job given the acreages that they were operating in. And about the time you finished the spring roundup, you were back into the fall roundup. But there were opponents to the roundups. And some of them felt like, I'm on the front range, my cattle aren't out on the eastern plains, but when you guys get my cattle, you take them to Julesburg or you take them to Kansas. And they opposed the roundup system. They felt like every individual owner ought to be responsible for going out and gathering their cattle. And it never prevailed. The roundup process stayed as they accepted, and the cowboys tried to figure out, okay, if we're picking up somebody's cattle that are just east of Denver, or just east of what is now Colorado Springs, can we just drop them? And somebody write back and inform them that they've dropped X number of your cattle at a given location, and then you can get them picked up. So they had differences within the association based on the scope and scale of the operation. The other thing that really, at the same time things were growing and those newspapers were telling the stories, is during the roundups, folks would buggy out, and then eventually they would even drive out. And when the cowboys were holding 1,000 or 2,000 head of cows in a rodeo, and the best of the cowboys, the older, accomplished horsemen, would cut a brand. And the reason it was them is they were going to have to read a cow, read a brand, and send her to the right herd outside of the rodeo. And so they were riding the best horses, and it was an event that folks loved to watch as they sorted these cattle to drive them back to their home ranges for the winter. We see that to a certain degree with folks that like to do horseback vacations with us and other ranches here in southeast Colorado and around that offer that opportunity for folks to come out and experience a little bit of what we do. So that boom was taking place, and boy, the world was great. There was abundant grass everywhere. There was these mild winters. There was these summers that had rain. And the world was just clicking along like it never would end. Well, it changed. War does some of it sometimes, financial markets does it sometimes, but we started going through those type of cycles. And in the early 1900s, we started having winter blizzards that by the time they did the inventory in the spring, some of them as low as 5 to 10%, some of it was 20 to 25% net loss in the winter. And then drought hit in the summer. And that's the first time that all these ranchers came to the realization that we've been kind of living off a fat life, and we've been over-exceeding our ability to match our cattle to our range. And so within the association, one of the committees began to advocate for the landowner doesn't put more cattle on the range that he's utilizing than what he can feed through the winter. Not the growing season. You're going to have to learn to stockpile this incredible brand of grass so that you can graze it through the winter. And that's that first step, early 1900s, that the association was in the lead of talking about stewardship and care for the land. Before anybody else was talking about it. We didn't have a USDA giving us advice on take half, leave half yet. This was, I see it, there's an impact, how do we adjust that impact? Financial markets created some of it. We went through a period of high inventory and over-exceeded the demand, but then there were also financial situations happening back east. So this is a list of the recorded corporations or businesses in Colorado. And the reason I show this to you is because of the exponential growth that took place of the recorded businesses. We went from single digits and then jumped up to 23, 29, 58, 44, 25. This doesn't take into all the ones that were operating privately that didn't organize themselves as a business within the state of Colorado. Next one is a later part. And you can see that it scaled itself back as we began to have to match the number of cattle on the range that meets what those cattle can stay grazing on. We did not have pellet cake. We did not have baled feed. It was strictly what can they survive on grass through the year. This is an example of the first brand book that the Colorado Livestock Association started. As you can see, it's not like what we have today, and it's typically rudimentary for what they published. But this was available so that we could make sure that our cattle stayed where we want our cattle to and possibly get them back if they're stolen. There were fees for this, and it was held within the association. And today, it's still held within the brand board, not the Colorado Cattlemen's Association, but we pay the fees. There is no public funding to the brand board in Colorado. They do their work based on the number of cattle that are inspected each year and the fees we pay to keep ownership of our brands. And that keeps it from the hands of the legislature. They can't touch it. They see it when we paid our assessments. They go, well, man, you guys had $10 million. We do, but over the next 10 years, we're going to pay those out to our agents as they do their work. We restructured that with the brand board and the Colorado Department of Agriculture so that now we pay our fees in staggered increments. So that looks like a more level budget instead of a budget that had high peaks of volume to almost broke before we paid again. So we smoothed that budget out for the brand board. And there were a lot of businesses here that were bankrolled, not by the rancher. He built it off of his back and his sweat, but then when it came time to capitalize it and begin that process of changing from open range to a ranching operation, which involved fencing and infrastructure, they started looking for investors. And a lot of that iconic attitude was back east, where folks thought, well, I don't have to go be a cowboy. I'll invest in the ranch. I'll get returns off that. So there was quite a bit of Eastern money that was pumped in, but there was a lot of Scottish, English, Irish, and other money that was pumped in as these entities overseas owned parts of ranches or outright owned all the ranch. So on the western part of the state, and what became a long-term problem for the Colorado Livestock Association was free grass. As we were transitioning and beginning to come to realization that these open lands are going to be available to be homesteaded, and the federally designated lands, the public needs some sort of restitution for the action on timber, mining, cattle. And boy, that one was a battle. And the association went through many iterations of arguments within the association. Those that were using federal lands did not want to have to pay fees. The realization was, this is coming. We just as well be the lead on it and figure out how do we price it, how do we work with it, how do we make it possible that individuals that are using federal land can continue to use federal land. So again, the association took the lead in negotiating with the federal government on how we go about doing this so that it was equitable for both sides. So the fees were established, the range allotments were established, eventually range tech individuals came out and were involved in it on the ground. But our association was instrumental, and they put together the first association that did that, and they called themselves the Western Range Stockholders Association. It only lasted 4 months. From 1900, it was 4 months that all it took to do that negotiation with Washington so that we would be able to utilize federal lands for cattle and sheep. But this is an example of them getting ready to go to the meetings in the Western and the Piceance Valley, how those guys set up camp when they were doing their roundups. So as I said, the transition was taking place. We were seeing more barbed wire fence. We were having to begin to manage how our how our cattle were being utilized on the range. And that's where the Colorado Cattlemen, as I said, took the philosophy of let's require, or let's encourage that you don't put more cattle on your range that you control than what you can graze year-round. And that's carried forward since. It's something that we do today, and there was a statement by Dick Goff, who wrote the book Century in the Saddle. Where do we go from here? The association has evolved. It's been through several iterations. Like I said, originally it was Colorado Stock Growers Association. Then in 1876 to 1900, it was the Colorado Cattle Growers Association. Then, of course, the Western Range Stock Growers Association for 4 months. Then they became the Cattle and Horse Growers Association of Colorado from 1900 to 1904. 1904 to 1918, Colorado Cattle and Horse Growers Association. 1919 to 1930, Colorado Stock Growers Association. We seem to have this 4-year cycle. About the time, back then, that was about the time you changed presidents. And we don't do that same route today. And then 1930 to 1949, Colorado Stock Growers and Feeder Association, as the feedlots and the packing industry became a factor in the beef industry. And going back into history, today we're fighting with the 4 big packers. You may have heard the stories. We're fighting with the 4 big packers about cat food supplies and pricing, and trying to figure out why is there such a disparity between what packers are charged and what they gain and what the producer does, and all those deals. They were worrying about it in the early 1900s, and they were having to direct the issue of how do we deal with it? Well, the way they said to deal with it is bring them in. Get everybody in the room together. Get the producers, get the packers, get the feedlots in there, and everybody hammer out a deal that works for everybody. And in 1949 to today, the final name became Colorado Cattlemen's Association. And yes, we do move forward. We have been active in the early 1900s all the way through today in the legislation in Denver, in legislation in Washington, D.C. We've worked with the Environmental Protection Agency, the Endangered Species, just about every issue, USDA, Forest Service, BLM, every issue. It seems like we have to be there to represent what's happening to our producers on the ground out in the country. So I like this one because it showed the 90-year history. And this was held in Glenwood Springs, and the association paid credit to all the past members that had served on the board and the various different names of the organization. This is a little bit of our advertising. We're a whole lot more wired into Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and all the other social media aspects of it, as well as our basic website. So this is a picture of the stockyards, and cattle look quite a bit different today than they did back then. But what I wanted to share with you today is this association, while it's been a continuous leader in so many aspects of the industry, even to the point that they founded the first national organization, which over time became the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. At one point it was the National Cattlemen's Association. But Colorado Cattlemen's was one of the founding organizations that fought hard to stand up a national organization that tied all these up-and-coming state associations together to have a cohesive voice. Because if you're cohesive, you bring more strength to yourself when you stand before a congressional committee or if you're negotiating with the Forest Service. So that foresight by those men in the late 1800s and early 1900s, their business acumen, their understanding of politics, the digging your heels in the ground and just saying no and pulling the revolver, that was never going to get us to where we are today. And I think they did a great job. But we are in a unique situation with Colorado Cattlemen's today. We have an opportunity to move back to our original home in the Exchange Building on the National Western Stock Show grounds. That building is historic. It's going to be preserved under historic standards, and we're going to be in that building again. That looks like we may get an opportunity to have finished product built and finished out by late 2024 at the very earliest. It may even go on We've had a year where we virtually didn't do any work because we can't get an HVAC unit into it. And so we sat on our heels and we're paying interest on loans and things like that. But we're optimistic about it. But the other part of that that is so outstanding on this campus, Colorado State University has built a spur campus with the goal in mind of that being an educational center for all of Colorado. And the National Western, Colorado State University, Colorado Cattlemen, Colorado Livestock, our goal is that every child in Colorado goes to the spur campus twice, once in grade school and once in high school, where they learn about Colorado water issues. They learn about beef production. They learn about corn production. They learn about vegetable production. They learn about wool and sheep production. And the hope is that they have a little bit rudimentary information when they start making decisions for their family or as they vote. But they can always come back. If they have a question, we want them to come back to the spur campus and talk to somebody that's in the water lake, talk to somebody that's in the natural resource side about grazing management, about forestry management. Much more than just the National Western Stock Show. It's about this becoming the center of agriculture in Colorado for education purposes. And it's just totally exciting that we're going to be there right on campus with it all and be a part of that. So like I said, a lot has changed. The association has evolved into a modern, very aggressive, very forward-thinking association, but the basis of what we do out here hasn't changed much. The beef cow, well, she's slightly different. She still functions the same way she did in the 1860s. She still grazes human and edible forage, and then through the process of her unique rumen stomach, breaks down that lignin cellulitic material, converts it to amino acids, and turns it into beef. And she does it year over year over year. We have this great saying that she's the original recycler and the original grass product. And so this is an example of, I bet I took this picture a year ago for a different presentation. But again, we depend on surface water. We've drilled wells, we've pipelined, and through the association working with NRCS, we continue to debate in the Farm Bill so that programs that help producers get these projects underway at a cost that we can afford by cost share with the government. That's something that we'll be working on as we go into this next iteration of Farm Bill, is the conservation title, the natural resource title, and others that are so critical of helping farmers and ranchers keep producing the food that we need as a nation. These two, or the reason I'm doing this, and then one earlier that showed my grandmother. USDA estimates that today, over 60% of the management decisions on the U.S. farms and ranches are made by women. It doesn't look to change. My grandmother lost my grandfather when my mom was 6 in 1944, and she stayed on the ranch. She learned to ranch. Her dream was to be a teacher and also own a dress shop. And that changed quickly. She learned how to ride. She learned how to get out on the range with 2 kids, my uncle and my mom. But she enlisted the services of the Society of Range Management to help her learn about the range in Colorado. She enlisted veterinarians out of Colorado and Wyoming to come teach her about cattle. Her aspect of ever learning, always continuous learning, she passed on to my mom and my uncle, and then as I've spent 46 years with my uncle, the same philosophy, continuous learning. So I encourage you to eat the most nutritious protein on the planet, and that's our beef. And all of us out here on the Eastern Plains, Intermountain, Western Slope, and throughout, as Kevin was saying, the stewardship is what we do on a daily basis, but this little group of people is really what we're striving for, and that's succession of the next generation to take over not only our operations, but these young people are our future leaders for the Colorado Cattlemen Association. So thank you.
Did we get some questions too?
Oh, yeah. I don't, no, I don't. You put that back to your association.
Okay. Well, we want to give you one of these.
Ooh, thank you. So, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, the youth, they have these deals, and if you're at a place where you're with a member of the Hunter Outreach Program, and they say, do you have your coin with you? If you don't have coin, you buy a round for the bill.
We need to talk about that.
It makes you know where your coin is if you're going to a CBW meeting.
Okay, well, I guess we have some questions out here.
Before I, been clear-throated until just now. Anyway, Steve mentioned the Mid-Prairies Cattle Rustlers Association. And I have an original minutes from 70 to 74 to 24, something like that, which has been out of publication for a long time. I know the Mid-Prairies Cattle Rustlers have scoured for them. But I have this one printed up, or a copy. But the question, I just wanted everybody to go back there and look at it if they'd like to. The question I have is, Steve McKendry had some cattle stolen the other day, and have you heard, has anything?
Last update from Steve, Erin Carney, and you all might know Erin. Her family's here from Los Animas. Her parents are Pat and Ron Carney. She succeeds Terry Fankhauser as the executive director, and she's in her first year and doing an incredible job. In a conversation on several different issues, the McKendry theft came up. So far, no clues have been uncovered, but Colorado State Patrol, county sheriffs, there is some cooperation in Kansas. Terry Devon in Syracuse is great to work with us. If we give him a notice of any cattle theft and brands, he will check his. While it's not a brand law in Kansas, some of those Selborne guys will work with us. If they see the brand, they'll try to read the brand and then hold up the cattle if there's any dispute. It's entirely possible in Oklahoma and Kansas, for those that do brand, you could have the same brand. And then that can cause a problem within the state. But so far, nothing has turned up. Colorado Brand Board is on it as well. We're applying the resources, but those cattle were on trucks. 80 head cattle were on trucks, and they can cover a lot of miles. And the further southeast you go, you don't have brand laws. So it's a really unfortunate. And most of us, very few of us with commercial cattle can afford to insure those cattle against theft. It's a really high price. You can insure bulls against fertility, horses against fertility, but when it comes to just commercial cattle that have a value of $1,600 a head, it's going to be pretty much prohibitive to put full insurance on your herd. I know we don't insure in that regard either. And it scares you when you hear about a family as nice and as giving as the McKendrys that somebody hit them that way.
One more question. I think that had to be somebody planned to get trucks and stuff like that. I just wonder, have you got any idea, or would you make a guess as to how far they would take the cattle to try to?
Oklahoma, they can drop down into the Gulf states where they don't have brand laws. You know, there's nobody going to stop that truck. You're running at night, you're going around ports.
Where are the likely purchasers of the stolen property? Who might they be?
That's on the back of the pickup, or they have a small trailer, and they load 5 or 6 calves or 2 or 3 cows. As they need money, they haul a few to the sale. So the culture is different in the southeast. And so you can drop cattle in low numbers over a period of time, and nobody's going to get suspicious about it. They're not going to. Your word is good with them that brand is your brand. There's no state recording of any brands that, hey, I brand my cattle because my neighbors are thieves.
I don't guess I really realized that not all states have a brand inspection. I just did not.
What Colorado built here was the first in the nation.
Okay.
Is there any kind of movement in these other states to
formulate the branding?
It's being pulled both ways. We recognize it for several reasons, and the positive is it's proof of ownership. It's also traceability for disease. That in Colorado, every time we move our cattle, we're brand inspected by one of the inspectors. So the TF cattle move from here to Walsh, and then from Walsh back to here, that's recorded. If something breaks in Walsh, they can come back and say, hey, we need to look at your cattle. We've got a foot and mouth disease outbreak in Walsh. We need to check your cattle and if necessary quarantine them. When you don't have branding, you don't have trace of movement, you don't have traceability to protect against outbreak. Foot and mouth disease to the beef industry is what this high pathogenic avian influenza would be. What it did to the chicken industry and the poultry industry, it can do that to the beef industry. So traceability is one of the positives of it. The other side of that is the animal welfare side. Do you have to put the hot iron brand on them? It hurts them, they bawl. And while it's historical, society is looking at us under the guise of animal welfare. And we're fine with that. We're very proud of the way we take care of animals, but we have some management actions that we feel are worthwhile, and that's castration, that's vaccination against diseases, and a mark on them that gives ownership to them. Can we go to something like freeze branding? Well, we can brand 300 head from 8 o'clock to noon. And you go to freeze branding, you're gonna get 100 head done in a day. It's a slow process, and then if things are enacted, there's some movement by the American Veterinary Medical Association that castration be done by vets, and then a pain reliever is given to the calves before they're castrated. And so, talking with the vets here in Lahana, I said, is there any way we can do that? We don't have enough vets to meet the need in southeast Colorado, but slow us down where we have to do every surgical procedure at a pace like that. And so that's the concept of an association that's back east in Washington, thinking how they might answer the threat of animal welfare. And they don't talk to us out here to get an idea what's happening in scale. But we have put out encouragement, and believe me, I'm not disparaging McKendry's at all. We don't do it ourselves. We have a set of corrals right by a county road, but we're 22 miles off the pavement. This was right close to the pavement. If you've got a set of corrals like that, you need to lock every exit gate on those corrals. You need to make it so they can't get to a part of that set of pens and get a truck or a trailer backed up to those pens. Because you are right, this deal was scoped out and discovered. And until we catch them, if we ever catch them, we may never know just how extensive the research was to kind of pick somebody that had gentle cattle, close to a highway, close to a set of pens. I mean, it was a perfect storm that they set up on the McKendry's.
A watch, you know, if you see something suspicious, call, you know, the sheriff, they're posting them everywhere on the connector.
Yeah, and this is response to it. And in other areas that have had it more, it's same as neighborhood watch, but it's going through the industry that watch out and report. And the sheriffs in the counties are okay. You see an unusual vehicle driving slowly through, it's not one of your neighbors, it's not typical to be there. They said, we'd rather you report it to us than not report it. The other factor there's been a lot of steel theft. So if you've got, a lot of us have portable panels and we'll stack them up somewhere that may not be at headquarters because we're gonna use them there next time. Well, you better get everything to headquarters you can and just eliminate the opportunity for thieves. With steel prices going back up, anything that's metal, if you leave a bundle of steel fence posts on the ground, you leave your wire on the ground, you leave your panels there, you're opening yourself up to exposure. So it's a new mindset that we have to deal with, that in a world where you don't lock your home, you leave the keys in the pickups, and if somebody needs it, just borrow it, bring it back when you're done. We're moving into a new era of people that don't want to work hard, don't want to be in a job, they're going to find ways, similar to the cattle rustling, of finding cheap money at the risk of imprisonment. But they'll take that risk, I guess.
Well,
New Mexico has bad laws. So you don't see much going into New Mexico. But Oklahoma Panhandle doesn't. And so the folks along Los Angeles County Baca County, they are subject to both situations of an Oklahoma that doesn't have brand laws and Kansas. And our brand board, our brand inspector, Steve Whitney, he is in constant communication with those neighboring states, encouraging them to start, where you don't have inspectors, start paying attention to seeing cattle that aren't like what you've seen before. It's awful hard. Black is black is black is black. But they look different. And these guys are so good at judging cattle that something pulls in and comes out of a truck and they go, "We've never seen those cattle before." And so kind of pay attention. And so he's working with them at all times, talking to them, trying to encourage them. And we're the same. And cattle are over here, they cross, cattle don't pay attention to boundaries. They're like wildlife in that regard. And cattle will leave Kansas and venture into Colorado, Colorado goes into Kansas. But we send it back and forth across. But every now and then it ends up being a little bit different than